Thank you for joining us tonight on Juris Education's webinar, How to Build a Unique Application Narrative That Sets You Apart. My name is Andrea, and I will be your host for tonight's event. We're looking at running this webinar for about 45 minutes. 30 minutes is content and just a lot of actionable advice, tips, tricks, knowledge from Mark and Jesse here. And then we'll be leaving about 15 minutes or so for that Q&A as well. So we encourage you to use the chat function throughout the course of this webinar, and we will try our best to get to as many questions as we can. With that being said, if we're not able to get to all of them, we do encourage you to reach out to our team via our website or book a one-on-one consultation with one of our experts, and where we'll really be able to go and do a deep dive on whatever your personal questions is, whatever your comments are, and help guide you in that direction as well. So a little bit of a presentation agenda. So we're speaking about how to identify and highlight your unique strengths and experiences, tips for telling your personal story effectively in your application, strategies for making your application memorable to admissions committees, and do's and don'ts for creating a compelling narrative. With that being said, I'd love to pass it over to our panelists here to introduce themselves. Jesse, did you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse. I graduated from Emory University for undergrad, where I majored in business, and went on to get my JD from USC in Los Angeles. I've been a writing center coach, essay coach for admissions for approximately 8 years now. And I know how difficult the process can be for law students, particularly those who went straight from undergrad to law school right away, or, you know, I've also helped people who've been working for a bit and wanting to return to school after having graduated from undergrad. So whatever your situation may be, I'm excited to be a support system and to be a resource for you guys. And yeah, happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark. I graduated from Duke University School of Law in 2021 after getting my bachelor's degree in political science from St. Leo University, just outside of Tampa, Florida, in 2018. I have spent time at a major law firm and am coming up on about a year now helping students get into law schools, and have specialized in really helping unique applicants who may have some challenges with their background, who, like Jesse mentioned, have taken some time off to pursue other ventures and then decided to come back to the law. But yeah, we're excited to talk to you guys about how to create a good narrative for yourself.
Awesome. So first thing we want to talk about is identifying unique strengths and experiences. This is going to be, of course, the driving point of your personal statement when it comes to your application, because in addition to having a great GPA and a great LSAT score, I think in this day and age, especially as admissions for law schools and admissions in general become more competitive, it's extremely important to hone in on why you're a unique candidate and what you can contribute to the classroom. And it's not just something that, you know, you can talk about your sort of, you can't just rely on your stats, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. So your unique strengths and experiences are the cornerstone of your application narrative. Begin by conducting a thorough self-assessment to identify what sets you apart. And being authentic is crucial. Highlight what truly makes you unique rather than what you think admissions committees wants to hear from you. So the authenticity element is extremely important, because a lot of the times I have clients that will sort of want to talk about super specific legal issues that they may be really passionate about and interested in, but at the end of the day, like, and I got this feedback as well from a professor who was a pre-law advisor for me sort of in college, which was, don't try to pretend like you know more than what you actually do. You're not expected to be an expert in the law right now. Otherwise you wouldn't be applying for law school. And so you don't want to try to fake it in that way, because the admissions officers are probably those who have a law degree and have probably worked for a bit as well. And so they know and will see through that kind of language that you may be trying to be like kind of tricky with. So just be very careful about that, and just try to be as authentic and honest as possible, because no matter who you are or where you come from, what you bring to the table is unique, because there's no one else that's like you. And you don't have to invent that version of yourself. You just have to be yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely stress what you warned against of, trying to talk too much about the law. You're not an attorney at this point. And also, that's not what they want to hear from you. They want to hear from you about who you are, the experiences that you're bringing into law school, and how those experiences can be leveraged to ensure that you have successful time in law school and successful practice of law after you get out. They want to make sure you're a good fit culturally, academically, and personally. And that's really where crafting your personal statement, other essays, interviews can really come in and highlight that.
Definitely.
At the beginning of, application cycle, you've decided you want to go to law school for the following year. And we're a little early in the process now, but that'll be coming up in the fall soon. One of the first things you really should do is just sit down and highlight some of the key experiences you have had in your life. One thing that I tell all of the students that I work with is that it's always better to show and not to tell schools about your experience and about who you are. It's one thing to, write a personal statement and say, I'm a very organized person. I'm a diligent person. I am an analytical thinker, but it's a whole nother animal to come up with a narrative about yourself, present it to the schools, and show how different challenges and experiences you've had before show that you have these qualities instead of just telling them.
Definitely. All right, so some self-assessment techniques. Reflect on personal professional journey, identify the challenges that you've overcome, highlight significant achievements. Reflect on both your personal and professional journeys, and make sure that this reflection pinpoints the qualities and experiences that make you a strong candidate. So a lot of the times people, particularly a couple of clients of mine actually have sort of wanted to paint this pristine picture of themselves for a personal statement, which is great. You're supposed to highlight your strengths. You're supposed to highlight what you're good at and why you're a competitive candidate and what makes you stand out in a positive way. That said, it's the challenges part is crucial, because when there's no tension or point of an issue that you've like overcome, you kind of just it makes the essay really static, and it doesn't really go anywhere because you're just like talking about why you're so great. But what makes you great really is not just the things that you've accomplished, but it's more about the hardships that you've persevered through and overcame. And it can be like something very simple but is meaningful to you, and ideally should be tied to the area or study, not necessarily the exact practice area, but I can just give you a personal example, which was the fact that I talked about my upbringing and how I came from a Chinese American background, and I studied Chinese literature in college, and I tied that into my desire to pursue a career in immigration law, because I wanted to help other people come to America and also achieve their dreams of having a better life here as well, just as my parents did when they immigrated here. It doesn't have to be exactly, of course, everyone's going to be different. And also what to keep in mind is that you don't need to be, you're not ever tethered to whatever area of interest that you indicate in your application. Like, for example, they're not going to come at you and be like 5 years later and be like, you didn't become an immigration lawyer. What happened to that? That you talked about that in your personal statement, though. Like that's not going to happen. That said, you want to be authentic and genuine about it, because at the time I did want to do that, and it made sense given my background in business and Chinese literature, because that's what I studied in undergrad and that's where my background was in. So that made sense. But again, it's about coming up with an idea of what you intend to do, and also painting a picture of what you've overcome and how you've grown from it and what you can contribute to the future that will allow you to become that type of attorney that you aspire to be after you graduate. So those are the sort of the self-assessment kind of intake tools that you want to consider, making sure that you take inventory of not just your accomplishments, but also the challenges that you faced, and painting a picture as to how you can make yourself stand out all the more because of the struggles and tribulations that you went through.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I would add to really, and this is especially true if you're someone like myself who is planning on going straight through undergrad into law school, really think outside the box when you're thinking about the different experiences and challenges that you've gone through. Because you may feel like I haven't been in the workforce, I haven't spent a significant amount of time working, I may not have the cachet of experiences that took maybe 2, 3, 4, 5+ years might have. But I've had some clients where we've written about, maybe personal trips they took that had a great impact on them, family experiences. You really should consider everything that you've been through, and because you'd be surprised on what you can really write in depth about to really show your good qualities and your character.
Definitely.
Yeah, so telling your personal story effectively, you really need to go into the process with a structure to your narrative, particularly in your personal statement, but not just in your personal statement. You want to make sure that you really have a compelling introduction. Make sure that you have a hook that will get the reader interested and really engaged in the statement so that they want to know what happens next in the story. They're going to be reading hundreds, if not thousands, of personal statements, supplemental essays, resumes, and it might day to day, it might start to bleed into each other. So really making sure that your personal story stands out and is memorable, so that maybe a couple weeks later, when they have admissions meetings, when everybody in the office gets together and wants to discuss certain applicants, you're at the top of the list. They go, "Hey, I remember Jesse's statement. It was very that story just stuck with me," and that can really make the difference in your application journey. You want to make sure that your narrative is clear and coherent. You don't want to just be throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, talking about 5, 6, 7 different experiences. It's probably a good idea to have like one main one and then maybe mention and pepper in a couple, but you really have a limited amount of space and time to make your case. So you want to make sure it's coherent and everything is connected, and then go with a strong conclusion that wraps it up, ties it into the catchy hook that we had in the beginning with all the meat in the middle. Some of the techniques we recommend for telling a good story about yourself is use vivid details. Don't be vague. If you use vivid details, it will make you more memorable. And definitely don't just think about logic when you're presenting yourself. Think about the pathos, the emotional appeal as well, because that you want to get into the brain of admissions personnel and make sure that they remember you and want to bring you in as a part of their law school community. And then the last one can be quite challenging, is you want to balance like a formal professional writing style, making sure everything is organized, make sure that your grammar is perfect, with a personal voice so that it doesn't sound like a robot wrote it, or AI. So do not use AI. That's another random tip.
Yes, do not use ChatGPT. That's happened before with my clients. You can tell when
Absolutely can tell.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, so Mark just basically covered this slide already, because he just explained to you, like he said, the beginning is hooking your audience in with a compelling introduction. This is the part, I think, where you can be a little bit more creative. Like Mark said, you want to connect with the human behind the admissions door. So it's the proverbial admissions door, so to speak. Like, you want to make sure that when you're not just starting off with like some template legalese, like you're extremely like impersonal kind of deal. Like the beginning is the part where this is your personal statement. This is the time where you can really be creative and show who you are as a person, because that's the point of the application and the point of your personal statement specifically, especially. The middle is when you build a story with a clear, coherent, and relevant detail, and use vivid descriptions to continue to engage the reader. And then the ending is where you conclude with a strong statement of your future goals and how the law program fits into these goals, and tying your story together. So what I like to describe it as is like a central nexus that connects your past, your present, and your future. And in addition to that, which is like kind of complicated, but bear with me, I think is what's important is you really hit on ethos, pathos, and logos, so to speak. Like you want to hit on the fact that you're emotional and you're being creative and it's being personal, but also not so much that it's all wishy-washy and all emotion throughout the entire thing. There needs to be sort of like an even balance between that and also the fact that you mean business. You want to do something, and you have a clear goal and identity and mission that you want to accomplish after you graduate. So there's a specific formula to it, and it's not something that we can sort of articulate. So it's harder to articulate generally because this is so case specific, but just trust that people at jurors, whoever you're paired with, has been through this process, knows the deal, and will help you get to that perfect formulation based on your personal background and your story. And we'll work with you until we get that perfect product, because it is something that can be done. With that guidance, it can become all the more powerful as a tool to get you in.
Yeah, as we've discussed earlier, one of the main things you want to do is make your application memorable, because you're going to be compared to many, many other students that may be writing about similar topics, especially if you don't get personal. I mean, anyone can write a general statement, but it's a personal statement. It's really about you. And this ties into creating a cohesive application across all of your materials. A cohesive application ensures that all of the components, which includes personal statement, resume, the letters of recommendation you get from professors, maybe you write an extra essay for your top schools on why you want to go there. Maybe they have a diversity statement. When you pull all this together, you want to tell a consistent and compelling story that all connects together. You want to highlight unique elements that make your application stand out. If you have any, super unique or non-traditional experiences, like, for example, one student that I've worked with recently quite successfully, he's like a coach on his college's Division I football team. If you've had any, immigration experience, you're not from this country, talk about that. Anything that really gives you the opportunity to stand out, be memorable, and just different from everyone, definitely write about that.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be like, and I know, like for me personally, it was about my personal background, or it could be about your culture or stuff like that. But it could be like, you could be someone who came from a particular circumstance, whether it's like being from a single parent household, or even if you grew up in a rural area, or you grew up in a place that perhaps didn't have that much diversity. That ironically could make you a diverse candidate, because you're coming from somewhere that other people may not have a similar experience with. And that's the point of law school, is to create, or from their perspective, from the admissions perspective, is to create sort of an environment where there's so many different ideas and so many points of view to engage in a really robust discussion and to gain those new perspectives. And I think that people sometimes limit themselves and be like, oh, I came from, down the street in Delaware, I don't know, like somewhere boring, and I don't stand out, I'm not diverse, so to speak. Like, that's not true. There's always going to be something about you that makes you interesting and special. There's no one else like you, and that's really corny to say, but it's just the truth. And you have to believe that. And will work with you to come up with that story no matter what it is, because there's always something interesting that you can sort of peel back and really and use as sort of material for your application essay. And I was going to say something else, and I think that you're doing yourself a disservice when you sort of limit your outlook, so to speak.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, keep in mind that they're not only selecting like the top LSAT scores and the top GPAs, because a computer could do that, but admissions personnel are trying to craft a community of students, make sure that everyone is coming in with a unique perspective, that everyone has something to bring to the table to make the law school community more diverse, more thoughtful, and just better.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I will pop back in here. Oh, it's taking a second for it to turn on my camera. I just wanted to do a quick check with everyone to see if there's any sort of Q&As right now. As well, as you can see a QR code on the screen. We encourage you, if you're even interested in learning a little bit more about what we do, or if you do have certain questions and you really don't want to talk about it tonight, we encourage you to book that one-on-one free consultation. Let me just pop into the chat. I see that this is recorded. Can this webinar be sent to all the attendees? Yes, so this webinar will be sent out to all of the attendees, and it will be sent to you via email within the next couple of days, as well as some sort of collection of resources, for lack of a better word, where, you know, on this topic, you'll really be able to do a little bit further of a deep dive. Let's see. How many words or pages is a personal statement?
Generally, and some schools go diverge from this, but I'd say probably 90%. It's 2 pages, double space is the general guideline. And a lot of students come in worried that, oh no, I can't write about myself for 2 pages. But then once we go through the brainstorming process, come up with everything that we could talk about, the problem becomes we have too much information, and then the challenge is paring it back, which is the complete opposite of what everyone expects at the beginning.
Isn't that the truth, eh? Awesome. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. I'll bring it back to you two, gentlemen.
Awesome. So cohesive application elements. It's going to be, these are the 3 pillars, obviously, besides your GPA and LSAT score, which is sort of separate, because those are things that you will be handling with other tutors, since we're sort of like the admissions coaches with the bulk of the application. So the personal statement ensures that it reflects your unique narrative. Your resume, it needs to align with your personal statement, and letters of recommendation. People and choose recommenders who can attest to your strength. So the biggest difference between, I think, the personal statement and the resume is that the resume is obviously going to be like a rundown of all the things you've done. Whereas the personal statement, I think Mark had mentioned, was that you're really trying to ideally dive deep into like one particular experience and expand upon that, because, well, you've already written about everything else you've done in your resume. You're not trying to regurgitate that for your personal statement, because that would be very impersonal. You would just be doubling down on everything that you've already given to them, and you don't want to duplicate anything. And make sure, I think, if you have no idea where to start with your personal statement and you have no idea like what you want to write about, I think one creative way that works for some people, and I think especially for me and people who think like me, for example, is that you can take all your application, take your transcript, take your resume, take even your letters of recommendation, put them out in front of you, and then look at it from like a third-party perspective. Imagine, like, you know, what would this person write about, and what would make sense? And if you are someone who's taken a bunch of English classes, and you've taken a lot of history classes, and maybe you can write about something that you overcame, or a challenge that you overcame when you were pursuing that major or studying that particular class, and expanding on how those critical thinking skills could apply to your future legal practice. That's a very generic example, but you get my drift, which is that you can look at one way is to just remove yourself from the equation, because sometimes we get so caught up with ourselves, and think about, what makes sense. Because at the end of the day, like, you could potentially write about, you could genuinely be very interested in, like, for example, rocket science. But if your resume and your extracurriculars and nothing indicates that you have anything to do with science, anything to do with math, anything to do with rocket science, you could genuinely be interested in that. But if nothing else backs that up, the admissions committee is going to be like, well, did you just make this up? Like, even if it's genuine, even if you actually genuinely love it, if nothing else says that or indicates it, or there's no demonstrated history of interest in that area, then that's like a yellow, almost like a red, it could be a red flag, honestly. So you want to make sure that things make sense. And that's, something that we can work on together. And it's not always as intuitive as it sounds. But my point is that this is there has to be a cohesive theme. Hence the title of the slide, Cohesive Application Elements. And you want to make sure that everything ties together. Like, there's a central nexus that weaves your past, your present, and your future. And letters of recommendation kind of should naturally tie into that as well. I would say, if you're working and you've worked for several years now and you're out of school, definitely prioritize like those work recommenders, like your boss or your supervisor, something like that. But also look back and see if you can get, if you're not too far removed from college, definitely like from your professor or something like that. And choose recommenders that know you. So you don't, even if you got like an A+ in a class, for example, if it's an A+ in like a seminar with like 500 people in it, like good job, like you got a good grade in it, and it might have been like really hard. But if the professor does not know you, has not met with you, you never went to office hours, and you're really good at the class because you had knowledge of that area, the recommendation letter might not be very compelling. Whereas even if you got like a B, for example, like I did in business law, I got like a B+ in the class, and I struggled a lot, but I was always going to office hours. I was always going above and beyond and trying new ways to like learn and understand. And the professor saw that in me. Her name is Professor Burdette. She's like kind of renowned, and she, wrote that recommendation for me, even though I wasn't like that A student. It was just because she knew that I had that initiative to like, try and fail forward and try my best no matter what. So just keep that in mind when you look for recommenders. You need to look for people who know you, and you don't necessarily have to go for the ones where you got like that A+ in. If it's a situation where the professor may not have known you that well.
Yeah, another thing I would add, another pitfall that people can sometimes fall into for letters of recommendation is they become ultra focused on like the title or the prestige of the person who's recommending you, and get away from, the personal relationship, which is the number one thing. You want someone, like Jesse said, that can talk about you personally. Don't just pick the person with the fanciest title that could possibly write a letter for you. If they don't know you at all, it's not going to be a good letter.
Yeah, especially, I know that some people always are like, well, this person was an alum of the law school, or unless they're like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that unless you work with them.
Unless they're on like the board of trustees, then
that's what I was gonna say. I didn't want to say that. Right, like, if they're like a huge donor, like maybe, but honestly, like if they don't know you, what are they gonna say exactly? Is my question. And then they don't know how to answer that, because it's like they can't say anything. Mm-hmm. Like you never work with them. You're just like an acquaintance. So it's like awkward. I don't know how much that would help your application. I don't necessarily know how much it would hurt as like an additional, but I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think that would be very strong. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as we've been talking about all night, you want to make sure that all the elements of your application all fit together. You want to make sure that your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, your resume, any additional essays you have, and even like how you present yourself in your interviews provides a cohesive narrative and a story about your life up to that point and where you see your life going forward and where law school fits into that process. You want to obviously choose recommenders who can provide detailed insights to your strengths and potential. Don't just pick the person you got the best grade with, or has the most prestigious title, or happens to be an alumni of the school. Pick someone that knows you and that will be the best that you can get there. I see we have an interesting question. I don't know if we want to do that now or later.
Maybe we should just get through the slides first and then come back.
Okay.
Do's and don'ts of creating a compelling narrative. Number 1, be authentic and honest. We covered that. 2, use examples to show, not tell. I think Mark literally said that explicitly without even seeing the slide yet. And then 3, proofread and seek feedback. I think the third one is the one we haven't really discussed that much yet, and it's something that is actually quite important, which is when you draft something, and I know it's hard because it's so personal, sometimes you don't want people to read it, but seek out, like, you know, your best friend or a family member that you think really knows you and wouldn't judge you, and have them read it and see, like, get their thoughts on it. Like, does this come across as authentic? Does this, like, sound like me? And, you know, that's a great indicator of, like, if you're in the right direction, because if it doesn't sound genuine, if it sounds manufactured, that's going to come across to your admissions officer. Even if they have no idea who you are, it sounds that way, and it comes through, and you want to make sure that you're just being as authentic as possible. And the best way to do that is to get feedback from other people who know you.
Yeah, and another thing, you can't read your own personal statement enough times to just check for simple, like, grammatical mistakes. And this also helps bringing in a second pair of eyes, or maybe even a third or a fourth, because the last thing you want is to have just a blatant grammatical error or spelling error that you might just be missing because you've seen it too many times at that point, because that can sink your application, because they won't remember the excellent story that you told, or the interesting experience you had. They're going to remember you as that person that can't spell, and why would we let that person into law school? Which is going into the don'ts. Avoid cliches. You don't want to, you know, be speaking in riddles or, you know, in too many metaphors. It's about you and your real experience, not about stereotypes. Number 2, don't exaggerate or make up a story, fabricate an experience. And this does need to be differentiated between, you know, putting your best foot forward, strategically presenting positive experiences, or giving things like a slight spin, of course, is fine, but you don't want to be getting into the area of making things up or highly exaggerating stuff, saying you worked for several years longer than you did, or you had a better position than you did, or just making up a story. Because even if you think like, oh, this is something personal, it's not verifiable, admissions personnel have seen it all. They've heard all the lies in the book. They'll be able to smell it out and just tell that you're not being authentic. And inauthenticity is just not to your advantage anyways. And then 3rd, steer clear of controversial topics, unless handled carefully, and even then, you might want to steer away from them. Now, what you could do is, and this is especially true for politics, you don't know who your reader's going to be. You don't know what biases they're coming in with, what their personal beliefs are. If there's a way that, if you do have a really compelling story to tell in a controversial area, there's ways to, you know, sanitize it a little bit to make it read more neutral, where maybe you're not talking about the underlying, like, ideological issues that you dealt with, but more of, like, the process of what you did. So more procedural than substantive in some ways. But in general, if you have other options, you might just want to steer away from controversial topics.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just too risky, like, and it's such a already, like, a, if you're talking about something controversial and then you don't know how to talk about it and you have no idea who the admissions officer might be, like, I don't think it's worth it. Although I don't think you should completely shut out certain topics if you know how to navigate them, or if there's something you're really passionate about and you've done, like, in-depth research about it, for example, and that's something you want to talk about because you have that specific expertise. But if you're doing it just because you want to like stand out or for shock value purposes, then definitely not. And I think there's only very limited circumstances where I would be like, okay, maybe we can talk about that. I would just, and we can discuss that one-on-one, because obviously it's hard to decipher what is or what isn't sort of controversial and how relevant it is to your application. But so it'll be case by case. Okay. Quick tips: maintain a positive tone, keep your narrative upbeat and optimistic even when discussing challenges. This shows resilience and a positive outlook. And stay within the word limits. Adhere to the word count specified by the application guidelines. This demonstrates your ability to follow instructions and be concise. That's literally one of the tests on the bar exam as well, is literally like there's a section, Mark knows this as well, it's like just gotta follow the instructions, because half of the game is really, it's not just about legal research and all the other stuff that you learn in law school. Like half of the game, so to speak, of being a lawyer, from what I've I mean, I graduated in 2022, so I have limited experience, but what I know so far is that a lot of it literally is just like spell check, making sure that you don't have any errors, making sure that you're following the rules and doing what the assignment asked for. And so that's very simple and seemingly intuitive, but you'd be surprised at how easily you can go off course. And maintaining a positive tone, yes, we talked about you need to have a challenge, but make sure that you're like, you're happy warrior. You're doing something that has been difficult but you power through, and you're able to have a positive resolution at the end. Always end on a positive note. You don't want to end on a somber note and be like, and then I failed. Like that would be like a bad application essay, because there's no resolution. There needs to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. There needs to be that tension, and then there needs to be a resolution, as with any compelling story. So maintaining a positive tone is key. You don't necessarily avoid those sad or somber moments, but just make sure that that's not like the whole vibe of the essay. And that can be hard sometimes, especially if what you've been through is very personal and very emotional, which is good because you want to tie and draw the reader in, but just don't make it so that it just kind of like is like a wet blanket almost. So you want to make sure that you end positively.
Yeah, and you can talk about, topics if they're important to you that may be difficult to talk about or somber or a little bit sad, but make sure you put that spin on it. I like, Jesse, what you said, be the happy warrior, show how you overcame something bad. Don't just be like, oh, woe is me, this happened to me and it's terrible. Even if that's true, it's just not how you want to present yourself. And
yeah.
Like it says, stay within word limits. If a school says 2 pages, double space, don't submit 4 pages. Even if you think, wow, I really need 4 pages to tell my story, follow the instructions. And there's going to be a lot of overlap with the prompts that schools give. So much so that, what you submit is going to be very similar in different schools. But if a school is asking for something specific in the personal statement, like, tell us why you want to go to our law school, which probably most schools don't do. It depends on the cycle. They change every time. But if they ask you to do that, make sure you address it at least briefly. You don't want to not address something that they're asking for in the prompt. But yeah, moving on, just some more quick tips. Like I said, follow all the guidelines. If they give you a deadline of, say, March 1st, final deadline, don't submit on March 2nd. Law schools, I mean, there's always a chance they could make an exception, but don't expect them to. They want to make sure that you can follow deadlines and instructions, because as Jesse said, that's like half the practice of law, is just following detailed rules and instructions that are provided to you. It's not really a mystery, but it's just showing that you can do that, which surprisingly, a lot of people can't.
And yeah, no, definitely. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you give them everything they ask for. And this is especially true on like the applications themselves, because they all ask for they all ask different questions about your background. If they ask, did you have any speeding tickets? Tell them about that speeding ticket you got 5 years ago. It's probably not really going to make a difference, but if you don't disclose it and they find out, that could make the difference for the worse. And then seek feedback. Get a consultant, like at Juris. Consult a trusted friend. Go to a professor you're very close with, or talk to your parents to, brainstorm different ways that you can present yourself and make sure that you're not falling into any pitfalls. Because when you're dealing with something as personal as like your overarching narrative that you're presenting to schools, you may overlook something that to you might sound great, but maybe to an outside person, maybe it's something you should diminish or not talk about so much.
Definitely. Okay, cool. So now we can go to the questions.
So there's a ton of questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Let's start. Okay, so there's a question in here. I think that one I can easily answer. Where can I get more information? Like I'm assuming they mean about this topic. So that's a really great question. There's two different places. First and foremost, a quick Google search of Juris Education personal statement. That will link you to basically any and all of our wonderful blog posts that have to do with personal statements. So everything from how to write one to examples to databases. And you will also be receiving a ton of resources in the follow-up email that'll come with this recording. Hopefully that helps. But for Jesse and Mark, I'd love if we can address this first one. It says, Jillian asks, my pre-law advisor always strongly suggested that we waive the right to see, view, or letter of recommendations through LSAC. Do you find this to be true? And if we aren't able to see them, do we just have to use our best guess that the letters would fit well with our application as a whole?
Yeah, I would. You're supposed to waive it, I think. Mark, do you have a?
Yeah, I mean, LSAC gives you the option. You can elect to see them as they come in. Generally, I say in most cases, and this ties into, carefully selecting who your recommenders are going to be. Because if you pick someone that you know personally, and they're going to write a good letter, maybe you've discussed a little bit about what they could include in that before, without actually seeing the whole thing, of course, then absolutely waive the right, because schools see what you choose. But there are situations where maybe you don't have the best options and you're not 100% sure whether it's going to be coherent, whether it's going to be actually personable, or whether it's even going to be positive. If you're not sure that it's going to be positive, especially, then it's probably better not to waive that right and double checking. But ideally, you would carefully select your recommenders and you would have enough options to do so where it's going to be positive. They know you well enough so that it will tie in with the rest of your materials. And then in that case, you're way better off waiving that right to read it.
Yeah. I also wonder, I don't know, Mark, if you've ever encountered that. I don't know how many professors would write a recommendation letter if it wasn't going to be positive. But I guess maybe you're saying if it's kind of like lukewarm.
Yeah. Maybe not like straight up negative, but like maybe someone would be like, yeah, he was okay. I guess he was in my class. I see in my grades he got an A, but I don't really remember him.
Yes, that happens.
But like if you're in that situation, you probably shouldn't be asking that person in the first place. So generally, yeah, go ahead and waive it if they're a good choice.
Awesome. So next question. Would you be able to elaborate further on the use of metaphors with an example?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an example off of the top of my head, but really, you don't want to be talking about, things that aren't personal to you. You don't want to be just saying like, general cliches like, right as rain or bright as the sun, or it just makes your material sound a little silly, and you're using valuable space where you could be talking about yourself and your own experiences instead of analogizing to maybe other people's experiences or to other areas.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes kind of into the show not tell kind of situation that we were talking about, where you're not trying to just like use idioms or any superfluous language that is. We want you to be vivid and creative, and in being creative, that necessarily means that you're not being cliche. You're not just saying things because you think it sounds cool, or yeah, you want to make sure that it is vivid. There's imagery, but it's specific to the situation and not something that could be applied to. If it can be just copied and pasted into any other situation, then that's probably something that is like cliche and not useful.
And you want to be concrete, not abstract.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Jay, let us know if that answered your question. Lori asks, with admission cycles, when do you typically need to have your application in if you want to be considered for all scholarships? For example, if you are wanting to start school fall 2025.
I mean, it depends.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it depends. Generally, the earlier you apply, the better. Just in general, and that's not even just for scholarships. That's for getting in. Different schools do things differently. Like, off the top of my head, I know Duke and University of Virginia will make decisions incredibly fast. Like UVA will start letting people in on September 1st. Yeah, Duke has like their, not an early decision process, but like I forget what they call it, where they reach out to certain people and they guarantee admission decision within 2 weeks. In like early September, they'll do this.
Early ad.
Yeah, that's what it is. And but in general, I would say by like mid-fall is probably ideal to make sure that you're being considered for everything with all schools. But by the end of, like, if you're applying to start in 2025, I would highly recommend you get everything in by the end of this year at the latest. Once we get like past December of 2024, you start to get into more of, where I'd say you're on the later side. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to be considered for scholarships. Some schools consider scholarships and admissions simultaneously. Some will let you in, and then they'll make scholarship decisions for everyone that they let in the spring. It really depends, but getting it in by like mid to late fall ensures that you're covering all your bases at all schools. So even for those that move a little faster and start allocating funds in the fall instead of waiting until the spring, that you're on their list as well. And things can change from cycle to cycle. Sometimes schools will change their processes.
Yeah, I agree. I think at some point, maybe an admissions officer had said in like a seminar or something back when I was applying, was that when in the beginning of the application process, the schools are like, their banks are full with the financial aid stuff. But then as the admissions deadlines draw to a close and the cycle comes to a close, like there's less and less money in the bank, obviously, for them to give out. And so that's why it's important for you to get your applications in a little bit earlier so that you are in that batch of students that get first dibs on those financial aid packages. That said, I don't necessarily believe, like, if you're in a situation where your application is not that strong and you're choosing between, if you know or are intent on getting like a much higher LSAT score, for example, in like December, and you feel like really uncomfortable with submitting an application with a lower LSAT score that you had in September, with like I was, for example, I was in a situation where I scored really below my expectations in September, but then I scored a lot higher in December, and that kind of like just made everything a lot more stressful for me because I had to like rush to get everything in by the new year. But at the end of the day, that was the best course of action for me personally, because I knew that I wasn't going to get into the schools that I wanted to with the LSAT score that I had in September. And in the end, I still got the scholarships from the schools that I was admitted to, even though I had applied much later in the game, by like January and February for a lot of schools. But that's not, I don't recommend that. I only did that out of necessity. And also there's more opportunities to take the LSAT now today than there were back then in 2018. So just time everything wisely and try to be ahead of the curve. And part of being a client of Juris is being ahead of the curve. So I think that automatically puts you in a good place to make sure that you hit those deadlines properly.
Yeah, and I said earlier is always better, but not at the expense of the rest of your application. You're better off waiting a month or two to make sure everything is as good as it's going to get on the LSAT front, on the personal statement front, than rushing in and applying early. But we're talking in late June right now. You have plenty of time to get everything together and get on the earlier side. And if you do that, you'll be in a little bit of a better position.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think I'd love to add in that I think that's one of the perks of working with a consulting firm, is that we do support you across the entire application lifecycle. So from the LSAC application to building and crafting your personal statement, interview prep, and anything else that comes with that. And again, we encourage you to scan the QR code on screen, take a moment, sit down, book a one-on-one and sit down with an admissions counselor where we can talk about things like scholarships, so we can talk more about your specific needs and wants and what that actually looks like for you. Okay, so I want to keep going with some of these questions. I want to be mindful of time as well, so I think we only have time for about one more. Can we submit the same personal statement to most, if not all, schools?
Yes, I think that you do.
Yeah, unless they ask for something specific. I mean, what you could do is draft up a base that you plan to submit to everywhere, and then if something comes up where they want more, you can tweak it from there.
You know what? I take back what I said. We have time for one more question. Looks like this is the final one. I thought that question would have the answer would be a little bit longer, but that's really great to know. I love this question. How many schools would you recommend applying to? The infamous question.
A lot.
Yeah.
Maybe more than you think. I applied to 28 schools,
Wow.
which was a lot, but you will get some results that you don't expect, both on the positive side and on the negative side. Like, there were some schools that I expected to get into that I got straight rejected to, and a couple where I was definitely a reach, but I got in and got substantial scholarships. And another reason why you should apply to really as many schools as you are seriously considering is you can negotiate scholarships off of each other. If you get a scholarship at one school, but you prefer another, and maybe theirs wasn't as high, you can email them that, and they may increase the scholarship to be more competitive. It really is a competitive marketplace, and the more options you have, the more leverage you have in the whole process.
Yeah, I agree. I think I applied to like 15. But
that's
I also
that's probably about average for what a good number is. 28 probably is a little high, but you don't want to apply to like one school or two schools.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I would say like have an even balance. Definitely have a bunch of safeties, but also match schools as well as your reach schools. But don't just apply only to T14. That's not a good look.
Fantastic. We are coming at the hour, so I think this was a really great time to end tonight's webinar. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for your expert advice and insights, and thank you to our wonderful audience at home as well as those viewing later. We appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.